Hello and welcome to another segment of Creepy Chronicles. My name is Kirsten and I am a librarian at the wonderful Red Bank Public Library. If you have not stopped in recently to see what is going on at our library, I encourage you to do so because there is a lot of fun stuff there for all ages. I'm again here tonight with my friend, and tonight is a very special episode because we are going to be dabbling in the world of true ghost stories through I Never Believed in Ghosts Until 100 Real Life Encounters. And this book is compiled, or was compiled by the editors of the USA Weekend magazine. And what's special about this book and why I love it so much is that the stories that are within these pages are compiled from real life people like you and me. They're not authors, they're not special writers. I would imagine that the USA Weekend editors put out a call for some ghost stories and picked the best of what they received from their submissions and put them all into this book. It is one of my favorite books. And if you can get your hands on it because you like ghost stories, I would highly encourage you to do so because it's got all sorts of things in here. Its copyright is 1992, so it might be a little difficult to find. But again, if you can and you love ghost stories and you love quote unquote true ghost stories, depending on what your beliefs are in that, then this book would be for you. So again, because we are in the realm of what is true and what might not be true, viewer discretion is advised. These stories are scary, but again, if you want this to be family viewing, it is up to you and your family. So we are going to start off tonight with a story entitled Tombstone Dreams, and it is written by D. Myers. One evening in the early 1980s, when I was 35 years old and living with my two young daughters in the Baltimore suburbs, I had a very realistic dream. All of a sudden, I was above my sleeping body and pulled outside of my room and out of the house. I didn't know where I was going and had no control over my destination. A force was moving me fast and low to the ground. I could clearly see various landmarks, homes, stores, and street signs as I was being whisked to God knows where. Because I was so close to the ground, I could almost touch the gravel in the road. After making a few turns, I found myself in an old cemetery. There were many tombstones, some with statues atop them, others in various shapes. I was being pulled to one specific area, where I felt I was being sucked down into the grass over a specific grave. I saw the name on the stone and dates of birth and death. This sucking, this smothering feeling was all too real. As I was being pressed closer to the dirt, I rebelled. Suddenly, I was back in my bed. I sat up shaking, the memory of what had just happened very clear. It took some time before I returned to sleep that night, and I wrote the experience off as a bad dream. But the dream stayed with me during the next few days. The feeling was so intense, so real. When Saturday rolled around, I thought I'd try to follow those landmarks to see if things clicked. I suggested to my girls that we take a mystery ride. Saturday was a good day to have an adventure. It was early spring, and we packed up some snacks. Let's take King, our faithful dog, I said, and I started the car. The kids were in high spirits. King was hanging out the window, and I was intently looking for those landmarks. Quietly, I made the proper turns, passing one site after another. Yes, at each mile, tree, or sign, the dream was becoming more real. I didn't feel too good about the reality, but I felt safe. Sunny spring day, music, kids, dog. I guess I was getting quieter, thinking about where this terrible dream had ended, but I had to prove that it wasn't real. But then we came upon the main entrance to the city's oldest cemetery. The gates were open, and we drove in. Everything was just as it had been in the dream, and I knew exactly where I was going. By now, my kids were really perplexed, but I told them what we were only going to be here a short time, looking at the old gravestones. We came to the place. I knew it was the place. 3 tall bushes were the last landmark. The gravestone was in front of them. The girls and dog jumped out of the car and began to roam around freely. I was a little slower. I walked to those tall bushes. On the ground in front of them was only a lot of dead grass. I kicked the clippings around. I saw nothing. And I was relieved, even though a storm was approaching in the distance. Just then, one of my girls called me over to see a unique photograph on a tombstone. While I was distracted, King wandered over to the site I had been examining. I turned around to find the dog digging up the loose grass and dirt in front of the bushes. There was an old tombstone under there. I went over and knelt down to help remove the debris. There was the name, then the dates. The same name and dates that I had seen in my dream. I was immediately chilled. Who was this girl? Why did she die so young, at 18? Why was I selected to travel to her gravesite? Why had I been forcibly pulled to her? I packed up the kids and dog and went home. As the rainstorm hit our area, I was fearful. I told no one what had happened. My mind has blanked out her full name, but her first name was Elizabeth. I didn't want to think too much about it. I know where she is. 10 years later, she still haunts me. Should I go back? Is there something I need to tell her? The story is real, but somehow unfinished, and I'm afraid to go back there alone. Spooky, right? That one always got me, and I'm really glad to have shared it with you tonight. So the second story that I'll be sharing is The Falling Girl, submitted by Carmen M. Cameron. The following story is sworn to be true by my dear friend from high school and her entire family. My friend's family had lived in the same antebellum home for well over 20 years. The house was one of the few that had survived Sherman's March intact, and along with its many other period details, the home was equipped with its own dainty and beguiling little ghost. One day each spring, the very solid-looking figure of a 3-year-old girl would appear in the dark recesses of the upper hallway. She was dressed in the short hooped skirts and extravagant pantaloons typical of those worn by the daughters of rich planters. Clutched tightly in her chubby arms, she held a much-worn and apparently much-beloved rag doll. Though through the years, the spirit's routine never varied. After walking slowly and rather awkwardly in her fancy clothing, down the hallway, she would stop at the landing near the top of the elegant, curved staircase to peer intently through the railing at the marble foyer below. Her attention seemed captivated by some fascinating movements, perhaps those of her parents' guests arriving yet again for the fateful soiree. In her distraction, the rag doll would slip gently from the child's loosened grasp, and in a panicked lunge, the little girl would reach too far for the cherished doll. Year after year, the child would follow the doll through the railing, dissolving, as did the doll, in the instant that she should have hit the black marble floor. Throughout the reenactment of this sad little drama, the child would utter not a single sound. As there was nothing terribly threatening about the ghostly visits, the family began to accept them as just another quainty quirk of their lovely old home. By 1965, the visits were taken totally in stride by the entire family. That same year, the oldest daughter of the clan was invited to attend her first spring formal at the nearby college. My friend, who was 11 at the time, vividly recalls her impressions of that magical evening. As she and her mother proceeded up the stairs to fetch the primping Deb, she looked back down into the entry toward where the handsome young fraternity man stood. She remembers him at that moment, slim and tall and athletic and utterly debonair, in his black tuxedo and patent leather shoes, a single perfect orchid enshrined in a plastic box resting on his arm. But when the three appeared on the landing a few minutes later, the young man presented an entirely different picture. Down on one knee, the corsage box crushed, and with his hair slightly mussed, the dashing young stranger was visibly shaken. When asked what had happened, he replied, "Your little girl, ma'am, just fell from the landing. I hate to imagine what would have happened if I hadn't been here to catch her. You have to do something about that railing." He went on, when encouraged, to explain how, in fascinated horror, he had seen the child fall. Instinctively, he had placed himself in her downward path, and the child had landed in his arms. Looking up into his eyes with a radiant smile, she had asked sweetly to be put down. Upon picking up the errant doll, she had turned with another perfect smile to say, "Thank you, sir," and with a curtsy had then walked calmly into the dining room and disappeared into the darkness of the room beyond. She was never seen again. It is improbable to assume that there is just one cause that accounts for all the various types of apparitions that people have seen. But in this case, at least, it was a desire so all-consuming that it was strong enough to penetrate the bounds of death time and time again. In that last bewildered moment of life, a youngster's childlike faith that she could somehow change her awful fate was charged with all the passion of a lifetime. And then, one enchanted night in spring, she found a compassionate young stranger awaiting her, and that last profound wish was finally satisfied. Perhaps the faith and innocence of a child can work miracles. So those are our stories tonight. I hope you enjoyed them. Again, as to whether or not they're true, that is up to you and your beliefs. So for now, thank you for watching. See you next week, and keep it scary. Good night.